So most people get to inherit a function. What's it like to have to build from the ground up three times?
Heavenly, honestly.
I love that answer.
I like the freedom and the ambiguity to move when there hasn't been expectation set before.
Hey Mallory, what's your hype song?
Oh, no one will be surprised that it is a show tune. It is the greatest show from The Greatest Showman. I have used that as like I'm in the bathroom getting ready at the hotel room, and this is what is hyping me up before I head downstairs at AMA. I have used this as my actual walk-on song as I've emceed conferences. So for me, it's like that first beat hits and woo, like my heart rate jumps. What about you, Volt?
Oh, no one's going to be surprised about this either, but it's George Michael's Freedom 90.
That is so perfect for you. You're right. I am not surprised.
Well, and that's a perfect segue into our latest episode of Higher Ed Icons with special guest star Terry Flannery. Her hype song is Titanium. Mallory, do you want to tell the story?
I think listeners are going to have to hang tight and listen to this interview because when she dropped that her hype song was Titanium, I think my jaw dropped with it. So stick around and keep listening. Now, Terry has been one of the first people to do her job 3 different times. And this is what I think I admire most about her. She was the AVP of Marcom at University of Maryland, the first VP of Communication at American University, and the first ever EVP and COO at Case. But man, when you walk into a role that nobody has held before, you are not handed a playbook. I think you're lucky if you're handed any onboarding at all. Like you have to write it. And that is what she has spent nearly the last 40 years doing, building functions from scratch, the standards, and eventually the book that the rest of us have all learned from. Certainly I can say that there have been few people I have learned from most in my career than watching what Terry has done with hers. So I am so excited for this interview today.
So am I. But before we get started, want to give a special mention and a special thank you to our sponsor, On Deck Marketing, who has made possible this entire Higher Ed Icon series. Thank you, On Deck, and let's get into it, Mallory.
Let's dive in.
All right, so Terry, you might not realize this, but you are one of the first people I met in my very first AMA conference. And that was almost 2 decades ago, and even back then you were legendary. I mean, Michael Stoner and I, we were walking the floor and Michael was introducing me to contacts and he's like, you've got to meet Terry, you've got to meet Terry. And in context, I understand why. I mean, you basically have been the first person to hold the first role in 3 different positions. You were the first CMO at Maryland, you were the first VP of Communications at American, and you were the first EVP and COO at Case. So most people get to inherit a function. What's it like to have to build from the ground up 3 times?
Heavenly, honestly.
I love that answer.
I like the freedom and the ambiguity to move when there hasn't been expectation set before, right? So the first time I had a job that didn't exist was when I was the first marketing staffer in admissions. And that pattern has kind of followed my career, or I followed that pattern in my career, probably a little of both. But I realized how much I liked it. So I know it can be terrifying, and it does kind of have some implications for what you have to do in a role that no one knows what it is for the first time, but it just gives so many benefits that I do it whenever I can.
Yeah. Well, and you have talked in the past about how marketing needs to be tied to an institutional mission, but you started marketing at a time when marketing was like either very foreign or somewhat dirty word in education. What was the dynamic like?
Well, there's still some of this. I know that people still experience this in some places, so it's not completely behind us, but it was much more the norm at the time. So I was the first marketing director at University of Maryland, and that position advanced as we kind of moved the function forward strategically. It is something that was so offensive to faculty in particular. And I'd have conversations not only with Michael Stoner, who you guys both obviously worked with, Bob Severe, Larry Lauer, Tom Hayes. These are kind of, I think, the founding fathers of marketing in higher education. And they experienced that wherever they tried to bring this line of thinking, this strategy into the higher ed space. And so faculty would see it as a business function. They would see it as the commercialization of higher education in a way that was offensive and inappropriate for the academy. And so having to translate what marketing is and how it could benefit the things that they care about, speak in the language that faculty speak in, was the key to making that an acceptable term for me in my work, but I think more broadly. And so in the book and in other places, I go way back to this definition of marketing that Philip Kotler used. He was the legendary chair of the marketing department at the Kellogg School of Business at Northwestern. And he was the first to define nonprofit marketing. And he talks about it being an exchange of values between two parties that can be, it has to be voluntary and satisfying in order for a relationship to form between the two parties and for it to continue. And so when you talk about marketing in those terms, then you can give examples that faculty respect and value. And you begin to help them see that it's not spin, it's not manipulative. If it's done well, it is absolutely consistent with the values of the academy. And so that's the trick, is, and has been all along, to helping people understand that yes, this is a function that comes from other environments, especially corporate environments, but it's one that absolutely can be consistent with higher education mission and helping us meet our most important strategic goals that you care about, whether you're faculty or others.
Did you expect in these roles that you would be doing so much of this political maneuvering within the institutions?
Yeah, it's taken really retail politics everywhere I've been to, and it requires a level of political acumen that you really need in higher education. There are lots of people have said the conflicts or the fights, the battles in higher education are so vicious because the stakes are so low. And by that, I mean the budgets relative to what we actually need are not there. And people are fighting in an environment of scarcity. But you really need to be adept at building trusting relationships with people who are your stakeholders, who you need to move. And that's especially true in higher education. In an environment where governance really gives so much responsibility to faculty that if you want them to come with you, you have to bring them along, and you have to be an actor they can trust. So it's always been part of the playbook, Mallory.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, no spoilers, but our next icon actually also has like politics in his background, like got his start working on campaigns. So we won't spoil who's coming up next. But yes, shush. But so interesting that this theme is coming out in this conversation too. You know, I'm curious, Terry, to hear like, in at either Maryland or American, do you have a memory of a specific time or moment with either your president, the cabinet, maybe the board, where you saw the light bulb come on for them because you were able to frame things, like you said, in the ways that they would understand?
Yeah. Can I tell you a way that it didn't work first before I give you?
Of course.
When I was being interviewed for the first marketing director position, the president's team who were interviewing me said that he'd been talking with a board member, a Board of Regents member, and realized that they were never going to be able to have the reputation for the university at Maryland be realized if they didn't start getting the powerful schools and colleges to work together and the prominent research faculty, so that we were more aligned in our messaging. And so the goal of the job, the first job as they imagined it, and the president at the time imagined it, it was to coordinate the messages of the deans. That was the role. And I had the incredible budget of $48,000. Solo position, no staff, not even an administrative assistant to help. And I said, thank you very much. I don't think you really understand what it will take to do this well. And I declined to go further in the role, and said, I'll try to help you find someone who can help with promotions and messaging, a communications position, but this is not something I'm interested in. And they came back to me a week later and said, would you talk to us about what it would take?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I had their attention. I will give you the example of the light bulb going on also at University of Maryland. I worked with a president whose name was Dan Moat, and he had rules about marketing that in our the way we represented ourselves, particularly visually, there could be no lab coats, no beakers, no beauty shots of campus with alma mater being softly sung by a choir in the background. What he was saying is, don't do what everyone else is doing. So he understood, even though he's a mechanical engineer, he understood the power of differentiation. And we were looking at concepts for our first brand campaign. And what we were seeing so far from the agency that we were working with, they were good, but they just weren't hitting the mark, and we couldn't put it in front of them. And so the head of the agency went and had like a 2-hour conversation with the president just to get his ideas and talk to him, which was a huge amount of time. And after that, the agency went away and they came back with the concept for our first campaign, which was the one that preceded Fear the Turtle. It was called Zoom, and it was wild. It was equally wild. It was animated, and it had the University of Maryland globe with the Maryland flag zooming in, flying in, and then it popped open and outside crawled all of these people who were contributing different things with a voiceover and CG with kind of just a few factoids about why the University of Maryland's momentum was moving ahead faster than any other research university and differentiating among the other institutions in the state of Maryland, blah, 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 whatever. It was wild looking, and he loved it. He loved it. So the key was the head of the agency listening to the president, who had an instinctive idea about what needed to be unlike anything else, and had the bravery and the courage to let us do something that really stood out. And then we had the freedom to really just blow it out. So it was great fun.
That is so cool. So, Terry, I know that in your book, you talk about 3 of the major questions that people usually ask. They usually ask around about organization and structure, resources, and measurement. But you just opened the door to what I really wanted to talk about, which is bold creative. So how do you ensure bold creative in campaign work? How does that come about?
Well, a lot of discipline, actually, and a little bit of courage, I think, sprinkled in there. When the team at American University came up with the concept for the WONK campaign, we had stakeholder research that came in that we started with. Then we had the president and the provost come speak to the internal team about what they were hoping the outcomes of an investment in this kind of initiative would be, a new brand strategy, the first one at AU. And then we spent time looking at everything else that was out there among our competitors, aspirational institutions, et cetera, and we put it up like a wall gallery. And the team just did a gallery walk to look at everything that was out there. And then we said, now what are we going to do that's different? So I had an incredible colleague, Deborah Wiltrout, who helped to lead the marketing team through this kind of internal exercise. We used it at a few different places. We had a war room with lots of creativity in it, and we just unleashed them and said, go, think about what the research is and is telling us, thinking about what we need to do, and come up with concepts. And within a matter of days, they came up with the WONK idea, and they thought it was so crazy they decided to not put it in front of me and to sleep on it. And then they brought it back and they did present it to me, and I needed to sleep on it, but we were all still talking about it the next day, and we're like, oh, this thing has legs.
Yeah.
So it does the job and is bold if it's in a very disciplined way, aligned with the things that you know you need to do in terms of strategy. And it's not so crazy that you're going to have an absolute revolt within the institution in terms of what it represents. I had someone at an agency once tell me that there are no new advertising ideas, that there's 6 basic concepts. I know people have heard this before, and I'm like, I'm sorry, that's not acceptable. They might be categorized in 6 different ways, but we are not going to use what someone else has said before. Nope. Start again. So
I love it. That's like the energy I try to bring to everything in my career. So I love hearing you say that, Terry. Like, admittedly, Fear the Turtle and the No WONK campaign, I mean, like, these are weird, right? Like, they're kind of weird. But, like, as you just explained, they were grounded in data, in competitor research, in the strategy of leadership. So they might be weird. They might be a little polarizing. People might not, quote unquote, get it. But do you feel like you were able to get the campus to get behind like that and embrace that level of risk because of the process that you took?
Yes.
Or was it something else?
I think it's partly that. I mean, if they hadn't come along the journey, every one of these things that I've led had some sort of internal campus-wide committee that was participating in the decisions about how we should proceed. And it had not the ultimate leader of each important function at the university, but maybe the second in command, so a level of influence and decision-making that people would trust. I would say that I'm trying to think which one to pick. Maybe we'll stick with the Fear the Turtle campaign for a minute. It sounds weird if you're not from the place, but it wasn't weird if you were a University of Maryland person.
And that's so critical, right? Yeah. Like that right there. Yeah.
I mean, it's got to be differentiating, distinct, rare. It's got to be real, so authentic. That's the piece that the internal audience is telling you whether or not it's right or not, or is best. And it's got to be relevant. And it was relevant to every audience that we were aiming at, trying to get the state and region to differentiate a research university from all the other institutions in the state, and why it required different level of funding and investment, because it was doing more than educating undergraduate students. So that whole campaign was about that, but it was embodied in this tiny little terrapin. Terrapins are like 2 inches wide. They're indigenous to the state of Maryland. They're like a form of turtle. And people love that mascot. And no one else has a terp. There is no other mascot like that, right? So automatically differentiating. And we infused this tiny little creature with crazy, bold characteristics. So he roared like a lion. He bashed through things. He stomped on things, and gave him the personality that people saw in University of Maryland people with grit, who are fiercely determined. They might be, the challenger. It was a challenger brand, right? But they were doing things that were confident and always exceeded expectations, and outfoxed or outwitted or outperformed the bigger challengers that were in the same environment. So I know it sounds weird, they all do, but internally, if it's working, that's half the battle, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there is that level of risk. So faculty are worried that Fear the Turtle is too athletic. And of course, the messages were not. But it was using athletic mascot. At American University, WONK, we did a whole bunch of creative testing before we walked that one out the door. I remember Elizabeth Scarborough Johnson, when I first showed her the concept, she looked at me like I was out of my mind. No, really, think about it. She was, I think, literally worried for me at first that we were doing something that was... it's true confessions here. I'm sure she'll listen and laugh. But when we did the creative testing, most people didn't know what the word was, right? WONK. Mm-hmm. WONK is no spelled backwards. So we walked them through this process. Why would we use this word? And the first was, it sounds funny. I don't know what it is. People who did know it were from really kind of older generations who thought it meant a policy nerd that was embedded in the data and didn't do anything with it, would hand it off to the charismatic politician who would then carry the day. Very consistent with American universities' programs, policy, politics, international relations are big strengths. And WONK was becoming something, a term that was being redefined as people who are passionate about using their knowledge to create meaningful change, which was right in line with the strategy. So we had to make sure that what we did embodied a confident, proud expert who is passionate rather than nerdy. But getting the campus to go along with a term that they thought sounded funny, or they didn't know what it was, or they thought it was nerdy, was definitely the place where there was some risk. And it took a whole bunch of proof of the creative testing that it was worth the try, and early reporting on how things were going. It was definitely doing what it needed to do in terms of initial awareness and pickup. We had the Georges, as we called them, George Washington and Georgetown, who were our competitors, the established competitors in the market, looking at everything we were doing, and their faculty and staff saying, where is our WONK? We want our WONK. So it was doing all the things that it should, but it took proof and evidence every step of the way to say, it's going to be okay, I promise. It's going to do what it needs to do. Reporting back, I think the first town hall I had the year into the campaign, my team was playing Titanium music. They wanted me steeled up to go in there. And I took every question from every community member that had them, answered them all, and I just reflected that this is working. It aligns with strategy. Here's the evidence, and eventually they came with me. But it was a much tougher hill to climb, I would say.
It's amazing. Okay, I have two questions that I need you to respond to or react to. One of them comes from something Mallory said, and one of them comes from something you said. So the first is, a lot of times people will say that a campaign is not great unless it's polarizing. That you either have people who have to love it and people who hate it, but if you don't have people who hate it, then it's not doing its job. So that's question number one. How important is polarization in your mind to successful campaigns? The second is something you said, Terry, which is a lot of times when people talk about brand campaigns, they sort of quietly gnash their teeth and say, it's supposed to be a brand campaign, but this is all in service to undergraduate admissions. It does not take into account the institution as a whole. And I'm curious, do you think that is true? Do you think that is still prevalent? I'm sorry, I'm not asking you a twofer, but I actually had 6 questions I wanted to ask you, and I'm narrowing it down to 2.
All right, let's do the first one first and do it quick. No, I do not believe that campaigns need to be polarizing to be effective. I think they need to make you notice. And one way to do that is through a polarizing kind of opportunity. It's okay if your competitors hate what you're doing, right? As long as your community is enough behind it to go for it. But I think the distinction is it has to be unusual in a way that gets noticed but is consistent with who you are. And if you do that, then you don't have legitimate haters that are going to stop the thing that's trying.
Yeah.
So to the second, I see a lot of institutions, because of necessity, having to focus the brand on the undergraduate admissions audience. And I think it's okay as a place to start if that's where you most need to have an effect, but it can't be limited to that. And so in the brand initiatives that I led, I helped people really think about it as a way to rally the institution about its identity. At the same time, you're communicating to different audiences about what that identity means and what it means for creating those exchanges of value that we talked about at the beginning of this session. And so you really want to be thinking about how a structure can broaden and is flexible enough to work with other audiences. I think it's okay if you focus on undergraduate admissions, but you've created the architecture to allow the expression to work with different audiences. So with WONK, for example, we could dial it up, dial it down. We could stay with the no rather than the WONK, of the campaign and audiences that were more faculty oriented, like faculty recruitment. With alumni, we dialed WONK up. With donors, we dialed it down. So that kind of structure will allow it to work in the places that you don't need to go first, but they need to be part of the overall program. Does that make sense?
It totally does. Thank you.
I want to come back to politics for a second because, Fear the Turtle and WONK, when those brands launched, the American perception on higher ed was different, and our, just politically, we were in a different time. And today we have a scenario where a lot of university presidents are being hauled in front of Congress, and institutions are afraid to step on political landmines. And I think about over the last couple of years, what brand campaigns have caused some waves in our industry, and I immediately go back to last year's Featherstone campaign from an institution in the Midwest. And you just said a brand does not have to be polarizing to be effective, but this one was, and for some of the reasons that you just shared, competitors hated it, and in fact, collectively, many executive level marketing communication professionals across our industry publicly came out saying that this was not a campaign that they thought was very good for all sorts of reasons. But if you talk to the people behind that campaign, if you talk to that institution's president, it very much is grounded. And I did on a different podcast, but that campaign very much is grounded and is consistent in who that institution is. So by your definition, Featherstone was actually a great campaign, but politically, right, I'm circling around to a question here. I think it's a very challenging time to launch audacious campaigns, and I'm curious to hear what your response is to that.
Yeah. Well, I'll just use that example and say that I thought at first, when I first heard about the campaign and saw it, I thought, this is a stunt, this is a gimmick. It will work once, but good luck trying to follow up with any additional kind of creative that goes along with it. When I heard the president and the leader of the campaign talk about what they were trying to achieve, there was an underlying strategy that was consistent that had to do with, we're going to be different in the way we operate as a higher education institution than other universities in some pretty values-oriented ways. So I thought, okay, they've checked that box, and that's important. And they got such incredible earned media for the president talking about the campaign to convey the message about why the institution is different. Check that box, right? So strategy and outcomes both look good. I can't, and I think I was on the record at the time on social media saying, I can't abide by the strategy to throw the industry under the bus. It seemed to play to some myths or attitudes about higher education that might have truth in them, but too broad a brush. I thought it was needlessly critical for the benefit of one institution. And we have to work with colleagues in our industry all the time. So I just think it was needlessly critical of the rest of the sector.
I think those are incredibly fair points. I am so curious as a side to circle back with that team to see how things are going now, 9 months later, and what the outcomes are, because I think ultimately for me that's going to be the deciding factor on whether or not this campaign was successful.
So Terry, you have gone on record that marketing needs to be treated as a strategic investment, the same way that one would manage an endowment or build a new science center or, heaven help us, another rock climbing wall. Just kidding. But in reality, when budgets tighten, typically marketing is one of the first budgets to get slashed. So how do you defend that long-term strategic investment of building brands when leadership starts panicking about how many enrollment seats we need to fill for the next term?
Well, you could look at your own Google Analytics And if you stop paying for an investment, you can see the change in the behavior of your audiences, right? A colleague that I worked with at American, Julie Zito, would always advocate, even when budgets were tightening, to keep something running steadily, even if periodic investments for more specific things couldn't be done in the same way. And I think that's true at a broader level. We can demonstrate that through case research and advancement, that when you keep stopping in and out of investment, then the results don't produce the same kind of trajectory as sustained investment over time. And the differences are very striking. I think the same is true in marketing investment as it is in fundraising, for example. So I would start with that kind of conversation with leadership if the inkling is there to cut. Then I would say be thinking about how you can behave in the same way that the CFO is about the management of the endowment portfolio, or the need to invest in capital in a new building that's going to produce revenue. Even in hard times, if you are still investing in that because there's a belief in the long term that the return will be greater, you need to frame the marketing investment in exactly the same way. This isn't just a cost center. This is something that should produce a return that we're counting on to power our success in meeting our other strategic goals at the institution. And so if we cut back on that, it means we might need to recede in terms of our ambitions on all these things that we wanted to do, whether it's enrollment of a particular class or greater fundraising, or fill in the blank, greater government support, or protecting the budget in a state if you're at a public institution. All of those things are going to be things that will be affected by a pulling back on the marketing investment. Is that what you want to do? Those are the conversations I'd be having.
So you recently said that playing it safe is not the right strategy anymore. For the marketing leader who is listening to this podcast right now, who is exhausted because of the demographic cliff, her staff has shrunk and she has not been able to replace that headcount. Her CFO is slashing her budget for this next fiscal year, which is right in front of us, right? So for that exhausted leader in this current climate, what does it mean to emerge triumphant in this next year? What does it look like in practice when you say playing it safe is not the right strategy?
Well, probably it means taking a break, like get a little rest if you can, take a week's vacation at the least. Try to reset and refresh. Do some breath work.
Yes.
Sound bath. Find your center, and then watch the commencement recap that your team created, or see the media stories about graduates that you pitched to local outlets that are just amazing stories, right? And get reminded about why you're in the work in the first place. And then find one little space. It kind of goes back to like having a job that didn't exist before. Find one place where a little bit of courage, a little bit of creativity, a little bit of innovation gives you the space to feel like there's hope and there's the opportunity to produce something that makes a difference, and measure the heck out of it. And if it does what you hope it will do, share the credit with your team, get them excited about how it worked, and start turning back to your leadership and say, look what's possible. In times where things are so constrained, you might need to shrink back the scale of your ambitions, but you don't have to give them up. And they don't have to be such big plays that everybody can see what it is you're doing. And maybe that's the place to rebuild some confidence and some energy when you are exhausted and the circumstances are incredibly challenging.
That is amazing advice.
Yeah.
So, Terry, half the people who are listening to this podcast, maybe more, are doing their jobs better because they read your books, they studied your campaigns, they've met you and been to your conference presentations. So I think I speak for all of us, and especially Mallory and me, when I say, thank you for giving us the playbook. Thank you for teaching us how to do this work and how to do this so well.
Yeah.
Me
I'll
too.
say, Terry, I started my career in higher ed in 2008, right when the WONK campaign launched. I just remember seeing what American University was doing and feeling like, I mean, it was for a 21-year-old, like that was the gold standard. It was the thing that I was aspiring to as a marketing professional. So and I didn't know you, I didn't know of you at the time, but you've been impacting my career since literally like the first day I was in it. So thank you so much, like, for trailblazing, because it's not easy. You may have enjoyed the freedom all those roles gave you, but I gotta imagine, right? Like, it still came with a whole bunch of challenges, and you did the really hard work. Like, you walked so a lot of us could run. Thank you, Terry.
I really appreciate it, Mallory. And I just want to give credit to the people who came before me, who paved the way for me to do, and colleagues to do the work that we did. And it's awesome to see people picking up the mantle in terms of the current environment and challenges to take it the next step of the way. So, right back at you.
Volt, the most operational lesson that I got out of that conversation was when Terry walked us through exactly how WONK got made. She started with research, right? She talked about stakeholder research across multiple audiences before any creative work began. Then she talked about executive alignment, making sure that the president and the provost came into the room with the marketing team and were clear to define what success looked like. And I thought that was incredibly important. Step 3, it was the gallery walk, right? Like, she put every competitor's brand work into a war room up on the walls. Her and her team studied it. And then step 4 was the creative challenge. Only after those first 3 steps did Terry and her team at American get to ask, now what are we going to do different? And the way she framed it was like, that question was the easy part because they had earned the right to ask it by doing the 3 steps in advance. Once again, Terry Flannery literally giving us the playbook on how to do our brand campaigns better. Are we surprised? No, we're not.
No, we're not, though. I've got to tell you, when she mentioned Sia's titanium, that has been playing through my head ever since that
Yes.
conversation. And the thing is that, Terry talks about her career. She talks about the process so matter-of-factly with a measured sense of grace. But behind all of that are so many battles, right? Fights with faculty and administrators, justifying the creative to alumni and community members. Can you imagine the amount of confidence and the thickness of the armor necessary to go through that process again and again and again with different institutions? It just boggles my mind how incredibly well-wired she is, and how incredibly disciplined she has been in her craft.
Did you catch when she said that the fights in higher ed are so vicious because the stakes are so low? I think that was one of the most shocking things she said.
Yeah, I think Henry Kissinger originally said that, but I just kept thinking of Edward Albion, who's afraid of Virginia Woolf.
Volt, what else stuck out to you?
I was really intrigued by what she had talked about in terms of what brands need, or brand campaigns need, to be successful. That they need to be different, they need to be real, and they need to be relevant. And to me, there was a certain sort of, I have wondered about this many times, which is how clear, like immediately clear, does a campaign need to be for the uninitiated? So she said, for instance, no one at University of Maryland was surprised by the turtle, the terrapin. Everyone understood it. People who had never heard of Maryland before probably are like, what's a terrapin? And there's that really fine balance that you need to walk when you're launching a campaign between what's intriguing and what is completely irrelevant or unrecognizable to people. And I think Terry has done, in all of the campaigns that I've studied that she has launched, done that really incredible balancing act of being intriguing, and yet also speaking to internal audiences in a way that a much more generic, a much more vanilla campaign would be. And it's just, I think you said it was weird. Was that the word you used, Mallory? Weird?
Yeah, I mean, it is weird if you're just looking at it without having any understanding of the context. If you're not from Maryland, right? You don't know about this turtle stuff. Like, it's kind of weird.
Absolutely. But when you dig in a little bit more and you learn about that little itty bitty terrapin and all of the really cool things that they did to infuse that campaign with character, it's brilliant. It's amazing.
Yeah. You know, I've got one more for you, Voltaire. And actually, so Terry told a story that reminded me of our conversation in our second episode with Tracy Halverson. Folks, if you haven't listened to that interview, it was phenomenal. Finish this one and then go find it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. But Terry told a story about how she was offered the first marketing director role at Maryland. She was going to be given a $48,000 budget, no staff, no admin support, and a job description that basically read, coordinate the dean's messages. And she turned it down, much like Tracy Halverson at the beginning of her career as a painter was offered a healthy sum of money to essentially just recreate a painting that a buyer wanted. And she said no for a variety of reasons. And you got to go back and listen to the interview to find out why. But what I loved about Terry's audacity to say no was that she was holding her ground. And the institution came back like a week later asking what it would actually take to bring her on the team. And like, I think that we are starting to uncover things that are threads that are maybe foundational to what it takes to be a higher ed icon. And the discipline and the ability to say no when you know that there is an alternative, better path forward, there's a lesson in that, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think the power of no is something that we are just learning about in all of these conversations, and it's incredible. And I'm actually looking forward to the end of this first season of Higher Ed Icons, when we take a look back at the 30 interviews and talk with each other about, all right, what are the main lessons that we learned? And I've got to believe that the power of no is going to be chief among them.
Yeah. Well, look, most people in our field would take the underbuilt job and spend the next 10 years trying to fix it and grow it. And she made the institution build the job before she took it. And I am like writing that one down as like a tenant. You know, if I've got like my 10 commandments of being a professional, that's going on that list.
$48,000. Mallory, they gave her a budget of $48,000. We have had bar bills bigger than $48,000.
Together, of course.
Exactly. AMA 2025.
AMA, right. The rooftop. It's fine.
Negronis happened.
If you were there, you had a great time.
Exactly.
AMA 2024. Also, the bar and the party I accidentally threw. You know, and again, if you were there, I actually saw Terry there. And you know what? She had a great time.
Amazing. Well, when we got to the end of our conversation with her, and you, I believe, were asking her for advice, she had said something that really stuck with me. Find one place where a little bit of ... a little bit of courage, a little bit of ingenuity, a little bit of boldness will give you hope. Measure your success, and then point to it and say, look what's possible. I thought that was an incredible way of summing up the foundation of her playbook.
Yeah, it was just a really awesome interview. We are so lucky that we existed in the same timeline as Terry Flannery, and that I really do feel. I said it to her, but I really feel like she walked, so many of us could run, and that is not just marketing communications. as a practice and field that is important to the longevity of our institutions, but also as a woman in an executive role. It is not lost on me that not only was she in brand new roles 3 different times, she was probably one of the very first, if not maybe if only, woman at that executive level for those institutions. Just incredible work that she has done to carry this entire industry forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Mallory, shall we leave people with some parting advice for this episode?
I think we should, Volt. What should we have them be?
I think we should have them be iconic.
We'll catch you next time, y'all.
Thanks very much, everyone. Talk soon. Higher Ed Icons celebrates the pioneers, thought leaders, and changemakers who have shaped and continue to shape higher education marketing.
New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Subscribe and leave us a rating wherever you listen.
Higher Ed Icons is made possible by our founding sponsor, On Deck Marketing, keeping colleges and universities visible where students learn, walk, and scroll.
Learn more at ondeckmarketing.com. That's ondeckmktg.com to learn more.
Higher Ed Icons celebrates the pioneers, thought leaders, and changemakers who have shaped and continue to shape higher education marketing.
New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Subscribe and leave us a rating wherever you listen.
Higher Ed Icons is made possible by our founding sponsor, On Deck Marketing, keeping colleges and universities visible where students learn, walk, and scroll.
Learn more at ondeckmarketing.com. That's ondeckmktg.com to learn more.